You know how life forces you to be strong, even when everything inside you just wants to crumble. Yeah, that was me. I never imagined I'd tell this story one day, but something inside me insists other women need to hear it. Because when love is too great, sometimes it turns into blindness. And I was blind. Completely blind. I remember the day I became a mother for the first time. It was in a small house in Ohio, with the smell of fresh coffee and the sound of rain pattering against the window. I looked at that little face and promised God I would give everything I had for them, even if it meant losing myself. And in a way, I did. Before I continue, I want to say that I ask God to bless you with all His infinite love, giving you much health, peace, joy, and faith, for we can never lose faith in God, for He will never abandon us, for His love is eternal and infinite. I also want to take this opportunity to ask that you like the video and subscribe to the channel. This helps me a lot, thank you. Now, let me tell you what really happened. When my husband died, the world seemed to collapse on my shoulders. I was left alone with 3 small children, a mortgage arrears, and a nearly empty refrigerator. I worked 2 jobs, daytime at a diner and nighttime cleaning offices. I never missed the bread, the hug, or the prayer before bed. But as I grew older, they just seemed to drift away. When the day came for the reading of my late husband's will, something inside me still hoped for unity. I thought that moment would bring everyone back to the same table. But what I found was coldness, calculated glances, distant hearts, and an indifference that broke my own. My oldest son, James, was the first to speak, and his tone cut like a knife. "Mom, maybe we should sell the house. Divide everything up." I stared at him, trying to find in his eyes the boy who once held my hand, afraid to sleep alone. But I only saw haste. A rush to erase myself from history. Each word felt like a blow. It was as if I'd been reduced to a number, a possession, a formality. I felt ashamed of having believed that love was enough. But a voice inside me whispered, "Calm down. It's not over yet." I didn't know that this would be the beginning of the greatest test of my faith. That night, I walked home in silence. The rain was falling again, the same rain I heard when I became a mother. Funny how God uses rain to cleanse our souls. I sat on the couch and looked at the antique clock that still marked the time of my wedding. And I cried. I cried until my body ached. "Lord, have I failed as a mother?" I asked softly. And in the midst of that emptiness, I felt something different. A gentle warmth, like an invisible embrace. It was the first time in a long time I felt peace. As if He were saying, "I haven't finished what I started yet." And in that instant, I knew something was coming. But before the unexpected happened, life wanted to teach me another lesson. One afternoon, I went to the supermarket and saw a woman arguing with the cashier because her card wouldn't go through. I approached her, paid for her purchases, and she wept with gratitude. "God will reward you, dear," she said. I smiled, not imagining how prophetic those words would be. The following week, I received a call. It was from the family's lawyer. He said we needed to review the documentation, and asked me to come to the office. My heart raced. I thought maybe they'd changed their minds. That my children might want to talk. But what awaited me in that room was something completely different. When I walked in, the lawyer wasn't alone. A woman sat at the table, her back to me. Gray hair, a firm posture, but there was something familiar about her. When she turned around, my heart nearly stopped. "Mary," I whispered. It was my sister, whom I hadn't spoken to in over 20 years. The past had just walked through the door. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. I heard what happened, and I couldn't stay away. Those words pierced me. Because sometimes, comfort comes from where we least expect it. And in that moment, I realized, God never leaves us alone. He only changes the path that love takes to return home. But reuniting with Mary was only the beginning. Something in her eyes told me she wasn't just there to comfort. She was carrying a secret. Something that would change everything I thought I knew about the will, my husband, and even myself. And it was at that moment that the story took a turn I could never have predicted. Mary took a deep breath before speaking. "You deserve to know everything," she said, taking my hands in hers. That touch reminded me of my childhood, when we used to run through the fields chasing fireflies. But what she told me next, it was like a bolt of lightning piercing my heart. My husband had left a secret clause in his will, one that no one but her and his lawyer knew about. According to that document, part of the estate could only be handed over if the children demonstrated true love and gratitude after my departure. Otherwise, everything would go to donations and charities. I remained silent. It was as if God had written, with his own hand, a way to reveal the truth. But the pain of seeing my children fail this test was almost unbearable. Mary wiped my tears and told me something I've never forgotten. Sometimes God allows distance to heal others' pride, and ours too. Those words echoed within me for days. I wanted to believe this wasn't the end, but the beginning of something greater. And deep down, I knew, a mother's love never ends, it just changes form. That night, I walked through the garden covered in dry leaves. The cool autumn wind seemed to whisper memories of childhood laughter and ancient promises. "Lord," I murmured, "give me the strength to forgive." I knew forgiveness would be the only way to find peace again. And when I closed my eyes, I felt that gentle presence again, as if he were saying, "Wait, the miracle hasn't come yet." The following days passed slowly. I went back to tending the plants, making my apple pies, and reading my favorite passages from Proverbs. Sometimes, silence is God's way of cleaning up the mess pain leaves behind. And it was on one of those quiet days that the unexpected happened. A knock on the door. Twice. Soft, but firm. When I opened it, it was James. He knelt, crying like a boy. "Forgive me, Mom." I hugged him so tightly it felt like all time disappeared between us. And in that instant, I felt something spiritual happening. It was as if heaven itself was watching this reunion. His tears fell onto my hands, washing away years of distance and pride. The other two children arrived a few days later, each with their own regrets, their own words, their own teary eyes. The house that had once seemed like a silent tomb was once again filled with laughter, prayers, and the smell of fresh coffee. And for the first time in years, I felt God's promise being fulfilled, not in my way, but in his. Sometimes, suffering is the instrument God uses to open the eyes of those we love. It's not punishment, it's mercy disguised as pain. I've learned that total surrender doesn't mean losing, but rather trusting. Trusting that, even when everything seems over, he's still writing the last chapter. And, believe me, his last chapter is always the most beautiful. Today, as the sun sets over the old garden, I close my eyes and give thanks. Not for everything I've lost, but for everything I've learned. Because love, when it's true, never dies. It only transforms into hope. And when I think of that knock on the door, I remember that God's miracles never arrive early, nor late. They arrive at the right time. But what no one knew was that that reunion, which seemed like the end of the story, was just the beginning of another revelation. One that would change everything I believed about my own past. I still remember the look on Mary's face that late afternoon. The sun was setting behind the thin curtains, and the orange hue seemed to paint every word she spoke with mystery. "He left something for you," she said, and I felt my stomach churn. I thought I'd heard it all, but what came next completely changed everything I thought I knew about the man I'd lived with for 40 years. Mary opened a small, weather-beaten wooden box. Inside was a carefully folded letter and an old key, rusted around the edges. "He asked me to keep this until the right time," she explained. "He said that when you were ready to forgive, I should give it to you." I shivered. Because I knew that when someone talks about forgiveness, it's because pain is coming. The letter explained that William had bought a small cabin in the woods, a place where he went to think. He called it the place where God spoke loudest. He never took me there. He and Mary were college roommates. The next morning, I took the old car and drove there. The road seemed longer than ever. Tall trees formed tunnels of shade, and the radio played an old hymn softly. I entered with my heart pounding. Each step echoed like a drum. The smell of damp wood and memories enveloped me. I knew that somewhere in there lay the truth my husband had tried to hide. And then I saw it, a small metal box, embedded in the floorboards, beneath the hearthrug. The key fit perfectly. For a moment, I hesitated. When the box opened, the air seemed to drain from the room. Inside were documents, old photos, and a birth certificate. I picked up the paper, and my heart skipped a beat. It was a child's birth certificate. Name: Eleanor. I felt a mixture of anger, pain, and compassion. How could he hide something like that? How could he let me carry the weight of his longing, without letting me know the full truth? But deep down, there was something even stronger. The feeling that this revelation wasn't punishment, but liberation. I just didn't know from what. I looked again at the photos in the box. In one, my husband held a smiling little blonde girl with dimples just like James's when he was little. Oh my God, she looks just like him. I felt tears well up. And a question tore at me. Where was Eleanor now? Why wasn't anyone talking about her? Mary knew. I remained silent for a long time. Sometimes, pain doesn't scream, it just sits in my chest, heavy, immobile. But as I stared at that certificate, something inside me began to shift. I could choose resentment or redemption. And God knows, I already carried too much pain to continue living in bitterness. Over the next few days, Mary helped me search. At one point, the phone rang. When she said the name, time simply stopped. The clock on the wall seemed to stand still, and the sound of the wind outside faded. Eleanor. I repeated, almost voiceless. On the other end, a soft sob answered. It's me. In that instant, something inside me broke, and at the same time, ignited. I knew God was leading me into a new chapter, and that this timing was no coincidence. I was speechless for a few seconds, trying to take it all in. Where are you? I asked. The answer came softly but firmly. In Chicago. I have something of yours. That sentence pierced me like a bolt of lightning. Something of mine? I didn't know what to expect, but deep inside, I felt a warmth I hadn't felt in years, hope mixed with fear. The most powerful combination there is. I spent the night awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what God wanted to show me now. How many times had I asked for answers? How many times had I thought I'd already experienced every possible shock? But it seems heaven loves to surprise those who still believe. And I believed. Even with my heart in pieces, I believed. I caught the train to Chicago 2 days later. I took with me only a small suitcase and the box containing the documents I'd found at the cabin. The journey seemed endless, but every mile I traveled was a silent prayer. Lord, give me courage. Help me to listen before I judge. Because sometimes forgiveness begins even before the reunion. When I arrived, the city's chilly air greeted me like an old friend. Chicago always had a way of mixing memories with promises. I arranged with Eleanor to meet at a cafe near Lake Michigan, the same lake where, ironically, my husband and I used to stroll when we were young. Life truly has a poetic sense of irony. I walked in and saw her. She stood up slowly, her eyes brimming with tears. I almost gave up looking for you, she said, her voice breaking. But something told me to try one last time. I moved closer, and when I hugged her, I felt a peace I hadn't known in a long time. It wasn't just the embrace of two people finding each other. It was the embrace of a story finally coming to an end. I cried. I cried like a child. Because, for the first time in a long time, someone approached me without expecting anything in return. Just love. A love born from the ruins of a poorly told story. And in that cafe, with the smell of sweet bread and rain, I understood that God doesn't just heal, He rewrites. But not everything was rosy. She told me she was sick, a recent diagnosis, and the reason she decided to seek me out. I needed to see you, before it was too late. My heart shattered into 1,000 pieces. Life seemed to play with time, always bringing us together on the edge between goodbye and a new beginning. But something still bothered me. There was an envelope in the box I hadn't opened yet. The last one. My husband had written, "For when you and she are together again." I hadn't had the courage before, but now, it was time. I opened it slowly, and inside was a photo. The two of us young, with a note stuck to the back. Our love will only make sense when forgiveness is complete. It's different, actually. Through pain. But what I didn't yet know was that reunion would awaken dormant secrets within my own home. Secrets involving the will, my children, and a revelation that would test everything I believed about forgiveness. The following days seemed so peaceful, almost like the silence before the storm. I thought everything was finally falling into place. My children were back, Eleanor was in my life, and even Mary seemed at peace. But deep down, something told me there were still loose pieces in this puzzle. God never closes a story without first revealing the final lesson. One morning, I received a letter from the lawyer's office. He invited me to a new meeting about the will. I thought it was strange, after all, everything had already been resolved. The envelope was simple, but the handwriting was different. Inside, just one sentence. There is an addendum that needs to be discussed. In person. My heart raced, because I knew that, in this family, nothing came without a burden. At the office, the lawyer showed me an addendum. He explained that William had left a charitable trust. Mary, who was present, interjected. "Your husband knew our nephews were getting involved in dangerous business. He wanted to protect what little was left. He asked me to keep it confidential until their hearts were ready to understand true value." I remained silent, trying to process everything. It was a blow and an act of love at the same time. Mary took a deep breath. The money he saved. It's not just money. It's a fund for charity, for the abandoned elderly, for single mothers in our city. He believed that if his children ever repented, they should be part of it. Not to receive, but to give. My eyes filled with tears. The man I loved didn't just leave a legacy. He left a mission. But the story wasn't over yet. Because, unbeknownst to me, James had intercepted some of the lawyer's correspondence. And when he found out about the charity fund, he didn't react well. "You want to give all this to strangers, Mom? After everything we've been through?" I stared at him silently. Strangers. I thought of all the nights I slept alone, praying for him. Who was a stranger to whom? The tension inside the house grew again. Voices rose, silences grew heavy, and the recent peace began to crumble. Eleanor, Alwasensate, tried to intervene. "James, maybe your father's legacy isn't about money, but about redemption." He glared at her. "You say that because you're not family." That's when I realized forgiveness is easier said than done. I went to my room that night and knelt down. "Lord, what do you want from me now?" Tears wet the pillow. I had already had forgiven, loved, welcomed. But now, I needed wisdom. And as always, the answer came silently from within. Teach them, not with words, but by example. The next day, I gathered everyone in the living room. The dinner table felt like the stage for an invisible trial. I placed the letter and bank card on the linen tablecloth and said, "This isn't an inheritance. It's a gift." The silence was absolute. You can choose what to do with it. But know that what's at stake here isn't money. It's a soul. In the following days, I began planning the project with the help of Mary and Eleanor. We visited shelters, heard stories of single mothers, and I saw in them a reflection of what I once was. Each visit was like healing an old wound, mine and others. And little by little, even James began to appear, shy but present. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The distant sound of church bells echoed through the window. It was as if heaven itself was telling me, "You're about to understand why all of this is happening." And deep down, I knew. The revelation that would come next would change everything once again. I ran my fingers over the seal and felt a shiver. It felt like time was holding its breath along with me. Eleanor looked at me with teary eyes, her hands clasped in her lap. "Do you want me to open it?" she asked. I shook my head silently. "No, dear. He wrote it to you. You should be the one to read it." And then, with a slight shiver, she broke the seal. The sound of the paper opening echoed like a suppressed thunderclap. She took a deep breath and began reading aloud. "My daughter, if this letter has reached you, it is because time has done its work." Her voice cracked with each sentence. "You were born from a mistake, but it was the most purposeful mistake God has allowed in my life." The room fell silent. I closed my eyes. Tears flowed before I even realized it. Eleanor read the excerpt that said, "He says that you were convinced you had lost the baby at birth, but he survived. And that, to protect you from a medical complication, he made a decision. That changed everything." My heart stopped. I fell to my knees. Tears blinded me. Mary came running, trying to support me, but I couldn't feel my body. I could only hear the sound of my own heartbeat, like a war drum. Eleanor was crying too, the letter trembling in her hands. "I'm your daughter, Mommy. It's me." She ran to me, and we hugged with the strength of those who had waited a lifetime for this moment. That embrace felt eternal. I smelled her hair, felt the warmth of her face against mine. "I've been looking for you for so long," she said between sobs. And all I could say was, "I've been looking for you too," even without knowing it. The ground seemed to disappear, and the whole world was reduced to that encounter. It was as if heaven itself had descended to watch. At that moment, I knew that God had given me back what time and error had tried to steal. Before going to sleep, I stared out the window at the sky. The moon was enormous, illuminating the garden. I felt a presence beside me, not physical but spiritual, as if William himself were there, peacefully whispering, "Now you understand." And I did. God writes straight, even in the crooked lines of the human heart. The following days were like living a dream. Eleanor stayed with me, helped around the house, and attended charity project meetings. My children began to embrace the idea of having a big sister. And Mary finally felt light, as if she had fulfilled the mission she had carried for decades. It was beautiful to see love rising from the ashes. I touched the pendant and noticed a small, almost imperceptible slit on the side. I'd never noticed it before. Carefully, I pressed, and a compartment opened. Inside, a tiny scroll of paper. Time seemed to stand still again. I unrolled it with trembling hands. It was a handwritten Bible passage, Romans 8 verse 28. I cried. Everyone cried. It was the perfect ending to an imperfect love. The certainty that everything, every pain, every silence, every separation, had a purpose. And that forgiveness, when it comes from God, transforms tragedies into testimonies. But fate hadn't finished its work yet. A few days later, I got a call from the hospital. Eleanor had fainted during a routine checkup. I rushed there, my heart pounding. The hallways smelled of alcohol and hope, as always. The doctor led me to a private room. "She needs immediate treatment," he said. "But there's good news." I stared at him, breathless. "Good news." He smiled slightly. "The diagnosis was wrong. The disease is treatable. She'll be fine." The tears fell again, but this time they were tears of gratitude. I knelt right there, in the middle of the hallway, and thanked God out loud. "Thank you, Lord, for giving me back what I lost and for teaching me that it's never too late to start over." When I returned home, I saw my children preparing dinner, Mary singing an old hymn in the kitchen, and Eleanor laughing on the phone. For a moment, everything seemed normal. But deep down, I knew that none life is normal after the truth arrives. Love transforms us from the inside out. And sometimes, the miracle isn't what God brings. It's what He awakens. That night, I sat on the couch and looked at the old photos spread out on the table. The past, the present, and the future were all there, coexisting in the same space. I picked up the silver cross and placed it over my heart. "Thank you, William," I whispered. "You made mistakes trying to make things right, but God made things right in His own way." And for the first time, I felt I could rest. But as I turned out the lights, I noticed something on the doorframe. A small envelope with no return address, just one sentence: "Not all secrets have been revealed." My blood ran cold. I picked up the envelope and clutched it to my chest. The sound of the wind outside seemed like a warning. And in that moment, I realized my story wasn't over yet. I stood in front of the door for several long seconds, the envelope still in my hands. The handwriting was different, firm, almost familiar, but it wasn't William's. The paper was slightly yellowed, as if it had been kept for years. The cold night wind blew against my face, and the feeling was the same as when it all began, that premonition that something big was about to happen again. I entered the house and closed the door slowly. The clock read exactly 9:28 in the evening. I felt a shiver. It was the same time William usually got home from work. Coincidence? I no longer believed in coincidences. I sat at the table, took a deep breath, and examined the seal. There was no name, no address. Just a handwritten phrase: "For when love is complete." My heart raced. "Lord, what else do you want to show me?" I whispered. I took a small knife and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a sheet of paper folded in four, and next to it, an old photograph. When I unfolded it, the air seemed to leave my lungs. It was a picture of a man and a woman, but the woman wasn't me, and the man was my husband. The photo was dated 1978, the year we were married. But the place wasn't Ohio, it was New York. On the back, a dedication in feminine handwriting: "I love you, William." The next morning, I went to the cemetery. I took the photo with me. The sky was gray, the wind blew cold, and the dry leaves swirled as if dancing with time. I knelt before his grave and placed the photo on the stone. "You could have trusted me, William," I said quietly. "I would have understood. True love understands even the pain." The tears fell, but they were soft, like liquid forgiveness. Suddenly, I felt a presence. I looked to the side. A gray-haired woman wearing a gray overcoat was standing a few feet away. My entire body froze. The world seemed to stop again. She walked slowly toward me, leaning on a cane. "I'm Sarah. I'm Eleanor's mother," she continued. "I heard you found out everything, and I thought I should see you before I leave." Her voice was weak, but there was immense peace in her tone. I couldn't speak. I just stared, trying to figure out if it was anger, curiosity, or compassion I felt. "William loved you, Margaret. He loved you until the end." I felt an overwhelming urge to hate her, but I couldn't. Instead, I reached out and held her cold hands. "Thank you," I managed, my voice breaking, "for taking care of her when I couldn't." She wept silently. "You're stronger than I imagined," she replied. "You always were. I just kept her for you until the right time." We stood there, two women marked by the same story, united by a child who was now an adult and loved us both. It was strange, but also holy. I felt heaven watching that encounter and smiling. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It is liberation. And in that cemetery, amidst the cold and the distant sound of bells, I felt free for the first time. Sarah handed me a small box. When I opened it, there was an antique locket and a short letter. "For when love is complete," the note read. It was the same phrase written on the envelope left at the door. Inside the locket were two photos, mine and hers, side by side, with a gold ribbon connecting them. I cried so hard I could barely breathe. God, with his infinite irony of love, had transformed us into spiritual sisters. But before I could compose myself, I heard footsteps on the porch. I ran to the window. And there it was, a young man in a dark suit, holding a briefcase. "Mrs. Margaret?" he asked. "I'm from the New York City clerk's office." There's an old document in your name. It appears to be Sarah's last will and testament. I froze. Sarah had been gone only 2 days before. The envelope lay on the table, heavy with meaning. I stared at it silently, as if staring into a mirror of fate. Sarah's handwriting seemed firmer than I expected, almost as if she knew it would be the last time she would write my name. To Margaret, the woman who taught me true love, read the first line. I took a deep breath. I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. I opened the envelope with trembling hands. Inside was an official document, a long letter, and a small flash drive. James, curious, approached. What is this, Mom? I just shook my head. Something that could change everything again. Silence filled the house. The ticking of the clock was the only sound in the air. Each tick seemed a reminder that time never stops for those who still have lessons to learn. I started with the letter. Her handwriting was delicate but firm. Dear Margaret, if you're reading this, it's because my journey has come to an end. And I want you to know that every step I took was out of love. Love for a girl born from your pain and raised under my guilt. I paused for a moment, swallowing the lump in my throat. Sarah had a gift for writing from the heart. She continued, I've kept too many secrets, and I know it's cost me my peace. But there's something William and I never told you, something that rightfully belongs to you. Enclosed with this letter is the record of the orphanage I helped found in New York. Its name? Grace House. It was our way of redeeming what we couldn't change. My hands began to tremble. Grace House. I'd heard that name before. Eleanor had mentioned months before that she made monthly donations to an orphanage by that name. My husband loved that place, she'd said. And now it all made sense. It was the same orphanage founded by Sarah and William. I continued reading. William donated a large portion of his estate to this institution, but the donation can only be completed with your signature, Margaret. He believed that love would only be complete when it came from you. The words burned with emotion. He waited for your forgiveness, even after death. I looked at my children. None of them spoke. The room was filled with something unseen, but felt, the spirit hovering between truth and surrender. James, the most skeptical, was the first to break the silence. Mom, if that was Dad's dream, then it's ours too. I opened the flash drive and connected it to the computer. Her image was shaking a little, but her voice was clear and calm. When I'm gone, the orphanage will be yours. Not as a burden, but as a gift. There live girls who have experienced the same abandonment you and I once felt. Take care of them as you would us. I paused the video. I cried. Mary put her hand on my shoulder and said, He's been preparing you for this your whole life. We went to New York together. We spent the day exploring every room, every story. At the end, I sat on a garden bench and closed my eyes. The sound of children's laughter enveloped me. Lord, I murmured, thank you for showing me that true love doesn't die, it multiplies. It was as if the weight of a lifetime dissolved into thin air. But when we returned, there was a small package in my mail. I opened it in the garden. Inside was just a photo and a golden key. In the photo, me, William, and Eleanor, smiling, the same image as the necklace I wore. On the back, Sarah's handwriting. The key opens the attic room. The rest of the story awaits you there. I looked at the house. 4 years, that attic had been closed. But deep down, a question still echoed. What did the attic room hide? And why had Sarah wanted me to open it only now? I had no answers. Only faith. And sometimes, that's all we need to keep going. The drive back seemed longer than usual. Every view out the window was a reminder of the road I'd traveled within myself. The golden fields, the bare trees, the sky closing in shades of lilac, everything seemed to whisper that something important awaited me back home. And I felt it. I felt in my chest that mixture of anxiety and reverence that only comes when the heart knows it's about to touch the sacred. When I arrived, the house felt different. There was a pleasant stillness in the air, as if even the walls knew the time for tears had passed. I climbed the stairs slowly, the golden key dangling from my hand. Each step creaked as if it held ancient secrets. Upstairs, before the attic door, I took a deep breath. Lord, if there is still something to learn, teach me gently. The lock turned effortlessly. The scent of aged wood and slumbering memories enveloped me. The room was lit by a circular window that let in golden shafts of late afternoon light. Antique blankets, trunks, forgotten portraits. Everything was exactly as I remembered. But there was something new. An oak trunk, covered in a white cloth, stood in the center of the room. At the top was a note in William's handwriting. If you've made it this far, it's because pain has turned into wisdom, it read. This room holds what I've never been able to say out loud. Every memory I've hidden, every prayer I've said, every dream I didn't live with you. I felt a lump form in my throat. The paper trembled in my hands, and tears fell before I could stop them. I opened the first notebook. They were diaries, prayer records, pages and pages of confessions. Today, Margaret cried while washing the dishes. I asked God to give me the strength to remain silent, because the truth could destroy her. My heart ached. He recorded his suffering, the fear of losing me, the weight of guilt. And yet, he never stopped praying for me. Between the pages, I found a smaller envelope, in Sarah's handwriting. When the truth finds you, don't look back with pain, but with gratitude. Because your love taught me what redemption is. I felt the ground melt beneath me. Sarah had left there not just memories, but forgiveness. The glass case caught the eye. Inside was an old videotape and a small Bible marked Psalm 126. Those who sow in tears will reap in joy. I went down to the living room with the tape in my hands. Mary was waiting for me with tea and a curious look. Did you find anything? I smiled with tears in my eyes. I think I found everything. I inserted the tape into the old player I still kept in the closet. The image hissed, then stabilized. William appeared on the screen, sitting in the exact same attic years ago. If you're seeing this, my love, it's because the time has come. I made mistakes trying to protect, I lied trying to love, and I lived trying to be worthy of what you always were, light. His voice filled the room. Forgive me for every silence. I didn't want to hide the truth. I wanted to spare you the pain. But now I know. That pain was the path to the truth. He took a deep breath and continued. Sarah was part of our story, not by choice, but by providence. And Eleanor is living proof that God turns even mistakes into miracles. Take care of her. Teach her what true love is. And when the time comes, hand the cross to her. She will know what to do. I paused the video and touched the pendant on my chest. That cross had already held so many messages. Now it would be an inheritance again. Not a material one, but a divine one. Mary took my hand. You noticed, didn't you? She said. Everything he did was to unite what was separated. He just didn't live long enough to see it. I felt a warmth rise in my chest. Maybe he's watching now, I replied. The air in the room grew light, as if the Holy Spirit himself had passed through. The television still showed his smiling image, and for a moment, I swear I heard his voice whisper, "See you soon, my love." Over the next few days, I spent hours in that attic. I read the journals, organized the photos, and prayed silently. Each page was a conversation with the past, each memory a reconciliation. It was as if God were saying to me, don't close the story, share it. And that's when a new idea began to blossom within me. We transformed the attic. Eleanor helped paint the walls, brought flowers, pictures, and a small sign she wrote herself, The Room of Grace. That day, while we finished, I found one last envelope hidden behind a painting. I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was an old drawing. 3 intertwined hearts and a phrase written underneath. Mommy, Daddy, and me, together forever. It was Eleanor, 5 years old. That night, I sat by the attic window and gazed up at the bright sky. The stars seemed to twinkle as if smiling. "Thank you, Lord," I whispered, "for letting me live until I understand what true love is." And deep down, I felt that my story was finally finding its purpose. But before I fell asleep, a memory came back to me. The lawyer's note that said there was a last wish on file. The document he hadn't yet shown me. My heart pounded. And I realized that perhaps the end held one more surprise. The next morning, I woke with a restless heart. The memory of the lawyer's note echoed in my mind like a distant beat. There is one last wish. Those words wouldn't leave me alone. The sun was streaming timidly through the window, and I knew there was still something to be discovered. Not a secret, but a revelation. I picked up the phone and called the office. "Mr. Harris, this is Margaret. You mentioned a document you hadn't shown me yet." There was a brief silence on the other end. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. William asked that it be delivered only when you were at peace." I smiled bitterly. I think it took me a lifetime to do this. 2 hours later, the lawyer arrived at my house with a dark leather briefcase. The same kind of briefcase William used. He placed it on the table and said, he called this document, the last testimony. His hands trembled slightly. I felt the same chill down my spine I'd felt when I'd opened the first will. It was as if fate still had one last line to write. I opened it slowly. Inside was a long letter and a gold flash drive. The envelope was sealed with blue wax, unlike the previous ones. The handwriting was unmistakable, William's. I took a deep breath and began to read. "My dear Margaret, if you've made it this far, it's because love has conquered everything I've tried to hide." On the paper, he said goodbye. I closed my eyes. The tears came on their own. His voice seemed alive within those words. "You were my grace incarnate. And now, I want you to carry that grace forward. Use everything you've learned, all the faith you've endured, to make this world a little lighter." I grabbed the flash drive and plugged it into my computer. The video began with a shot of the garden of our old house. William appeared, older, with a tired face but the same tender look. "If you're watching this, my love, it's because the time has come to say goodbye without pain." He spoke about love, about mistakes, about faith. Tears began to fall onto the keyboard. I wanted to touch him, tell him he was already forgiven. But all I could do was hold the pendant around his neck and whisper, "I forgive you." The screen seemed to glow brighter, as if he had heard. He continued, "My last wish is simple. I want you to turn our house into a shelter. A home for single mothers, widows, women tired of struggling without support. Give them what you gave me, faith, comfort, and courage. Call the place, the House of Faith. And know that I will be watching over you." The following days were a holy rush. We transformed old rooms into bedrooms, the attic became a small chapel, and the garden, where before there had been only silence, now had flowers and laughter. Every hammer blow, every painting felt like an answered prayer. It was as if the house breathed again. We inaugurated the house on William's birthday. As I spoke, I looked up at the sky. A ray of light broke through the clouds and illuminated the garden. It was as if God, with his own brilliance, was signing the final chapter of that promise. James held my hand, and Eleanor leaned against my shoulder. "Does Daddy see?" she asked. I smiled. Yes. And smiling. In the months that followed, the shelter grew. Women arrived with stories of pain, abandonment, and new beginnings. Each of them saw me not as a savior, but as a mirror. And I listened to them, prayed, and taught them. Sometimes we gathered in the attic, the very same room of grace, to sing and cry together. It was like experiencing heaven up close. But amidst all this peace, there was still one envelope I hadn't opened. The last one, left inside the Bible I found in the trunk. I kept it for months, with fear and reverence. Until one night, as the rain beat against the windows, I knew it was time. I opened it slowly. Inside was just a handwritten sentence. See you at dawn. The handwriting was William's. I lay down on the sofa and fell asleep with the cross in my hands. I dreamed I was standing at the edge of a golden field, the same one we'd seen from the porch in the early years of our marriage. William was there, smiling, and behind him were all the people we'd once loved. You've done your part, my love, he said. Now rest. I woke up crying, but with a light heart. The morning light streamed through the curtains, just as he promised, at daybreak. I picked up my Bible and opened it to Psalm 23. Surely goodness and mercy will follow me all the days of my life. And there, alone and at peace, I understood that true love doesn't end, it just changes form. William was gone, but what we left in each other would live on in every woman, in every prayer, in every new dawn within that house. But there was still one last thing I needed to do. Something he'd asked but never had the time to do. And that would be my final act of love. The days at the House of Faith became my new routine. Each morning, I woke to the sound of laughter, prayers, and hurried footsteps in the hallway. That house, which had once sheltered loneliness and pain, was now a haven of hope. And yet, something inside me whispered, it's not over yet. There was one last gesture, one last surrender, the kind of mission the heart recognizes before it even understands. I remembered a promise. In the early years of our marriage, William and I dreamed of traveling to the small village where we met, in Maine, and planting a tree in the local church garden, a symbol of our love. But life, with its urgencies and pains, never allowed it. Now it seemed God was calling me to fulfill that promise alone. Or perhaps, not so alone. I told Mary and Eleanor, I want to plant that tree. They smiled, tears in their eyes. Then we'll go with you. And so, a few weeks later, we packed up and headed north, along roads lined with woods that already hinted at autumn. Every mile felt like an answered prayer. We arrived at the small church. The pastor was waiting for me. Waiting? I asked, surprised. He showed me a dusty envelope. Your husband asked me to keep this. He said you'd come back someday. My legs nearly gave out. I sat down on the pew and opened the envelope. Inside was just a small seed wrapped in tissue paper and a note, for the day love blooms again. I'm Margaret. Eleanor is my daughter. We planted the seed in that garden, under the soft autumn light. It wasn't just a tree. It was proof that love, when sown in faith, always blossoms. I returned home with a light heart. The days passed, and the shelter continued to grow. Young mothers found strength, children learned to pray, and every corner of that house seemed to sing a song of new beginnings. I walked the halls and thought, this was it, William. This was it all along. As the weeks passed, the tree grew strong and beautiful. We called it the Grace Tree. The women at the shelter began leaving prayer notes hanging from the branches. I read each one, crying and smiling at the same time. And every time the wind rustled the leaves, it felt like God himself answered. One afternoon, I sat on the garden bench, Eleanor beside me. Mom, she said, one day when you're no longer here, what do you want us to do with all this? I thought for a moment, looking up at the golden sky. Keep loving. Keep believing. And most of all, keep forgiving. The world needs more healed hearts. She rested her head on my shoulder, and we sat in silence. Sometimes love doesn't need words. It just is. The sun was setting slowly, and I felt a deep serenity, as if my soul knew everything was exactly where it should be. That night, I slept more soundly than ever. I dreamed of the golden field again. William was waiting for me, smiling, under the shade of the tree we planted. It's beautiful, he said. Just like you. I held his hand and felt the warmth of eternity. It took me a while, but I'm here. He laughed. You always arrive on time. I woke to the rising sun. The silver cross still hung over my chest. Mary entered the room with fresh coffee and a warm smile. Did you sleep well? She asked. I simply nodded, looking out the window. Light filtered through the curtains and fell on the flower pot. Yes, I replied. Sleep has never been so sweet. Now that you've come this far with me, take a deep breath. Because this story isn't just about me. It's about us. About all the women who once loved too much, who gave themselves to the limit, and who still found strength where there was only silence. Maybe you too have someone who's walked away, a wound that time hasn't healed, or a memory that still hurts when the day ends. But remember, God's love never arrives late, it arrives at the right time. And sometimes, the miracle doesn't come from outside. It begins within you, the moment you decide to forgive, start over, and believe again. If this story touched your heart, it's because there's something inside you that also wants to blossom. Do you believe in second chances? In loves that time never fades? Then perhaps this is your seed, the same one I planted back then, in the garden of faith. What is your seed? And now I want to ask you, have you ever experienced something similar? Tell me in the comments. I'd love to hear your story. Your testimony might touch someone who needs these exact words today. Before I finish, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me this far. And I want you to know, you are strong. You are loved. Never doubt that. And so we can continue this journey of faith. Like the video and subscribe to the channel. That way, you'll continue receiving stories that strengthen your faith, warm your heart, and remind you that God never abandons those who believe in love. May the Lord bless you with peace, health, joy, and faith. And may each dawn remind you that, as long as there is life, there will be a new beginning. Because love, true love, always fulfills its promise.